Hi, I'm Zach Singerman, and welcome to the Gen ZG Speaker Series. In this series, I'll be interviewing national leaders on the topics of anti-Semitism, Israel, and leadership. Today, our guest is Congressman Brad Schneider, who represents the 10th Congressional District of Illinois. He is a leader in Congress on Israel and fighting BDS. Congressman, thank you so much for coming on today.
Zach, it's my pleasure to be with you.
So our first topic is the impact of Israel and Judaism on you. So, after graduating with a degree in industrial engineering from Northwestern, you worked on a kibbutz in Israel. How did that experience impact you?
Well, thanks, Zach. Let me go back even further. So, to me, my Judaism and connection to Israel is something that has been part of my life literally as long as I can remember. And my first memories, going back to as a young child at synagogue growing up in Denver, lived in Miami in 1973. I vividly remember coming out of Yom Kippur services and listening to radio as the Yom Kippur War had begun at that point, and the fear and dread that I personally felt because of my connection. So it is, in my essence, who I am. When I graduated college a long time ago, in 1983, I had the opportunity to go live in Israel for a year. Spent 6 months studying Hebrew and living in a small town called Arad. And then the second 6 months was on a kibbutz in Dor, working as an industrial engineer. And for me, it was important to go to Israel, have the chance to really experience it firsthand, as close as I could to being a part of the fabric of the country. And that's what that year gave me. So it's very special.
And so, you said Judaism has been with you throughout your entire life. So, has it impacted your decisions in Congress?
Sure, it colors everything I look at throughout my life. There are certain values you learn and become a part of who you are as a Jew. I have in my office at home a paper cut of Hillel's famous saying, "If I am not for myself, who will be? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" I think that's a crystallization of Jewish values that reflects what I do as a member of Congress. I represent the 10th District of Illinois. That is my job. And first and foremost is putting the interests of my district front and center. I say I run as a Democrat, but I represent everybody, Democrats, Republicans, Independents. But the issues I look at, how to help people, how to lift them up, how to make a difference. Values like, it talks in the Torah about we do this because we were slaves in Egypt. Remember the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, because we were slaves in Egypt. All of that affects how I make decisions as a representative.
And so, just on the topic of Israel, today in Congress there's a lot less unity on support for Israel. How do you discuss Israel with your colleagues in Congress who disagree with you?
Good question. I don't think there's any less unity than there's ever been. There's always been dissenting voices. Going back when I was in school, when I was coming to Washington to advocate for a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, now as a representative in the U.S. Congress, there have always been people who have been unfriendly towards Israel, towards the Jewish state, even towards the idea of a Jewish state. And I think the approach is still the same. To talk about the Jewish connection to the land of Israel that goes back 3,000 years. Uninterrupted Jewish presence in the land of Israel for 3,000 years. Talk about the Jewish connection during the diaspora from the Roman times until 1948. And the fact of the matter is that Jews outside of Israel have never been able to fully control their destiny. To assure their security, Israel provides that. But I think it's also important to talk about the land of Israel as a land that has another claim. Palestinians have been in the land not quite 3,000 years. It goes back about 1,300, 1,400 years. But I don't say that to delegitimize their claim. We have two peoples with legitimate claims on the same land. We need to find a way to share that. Israel has made efforts to do so with the help of the United States. In 2000 with President Clinton, 2008 with President Bush, and then again a few years later with President Obama. On the Israeli side, it was Rabin, it was Ehud Barak, Palestinians need to come to the table. And so when I talk to my colleagues about it, I try to lay out all the facts, fight the delegitimacy efforts against Israel, but recognize the legitimate claims of both people and the mutual aspirations for a state of their own, which ultimately, hopefully, will be a negotiated two-state agreement with a democratic Jewish state of Israel and a Palestinian state living next to it in peace and security.
You actually answered my next question, which was asking you why you supported a two-state solution. So if there's anything more you want to talk about on that.
No, I think it's vital. A one-state solution, and there are people on both ends that support that. On the Israeli side, pro-Israeli side, people believe that Israel, the kingdom of Judah, the land is defined in a certain way, and all of it is by divine providence or divine right, Jewish land. And they turn a blind eye to Palestinians. I think they also turn a blind eye to the reality that you can't have a Jewish state as an occupied country. But a Jewish democratic state, one of those two things has to give. On the Palestinian extreme side, they see all the land, the same land, as Palestinian, as Arab, as Muslim land. And there's no room for Jews. I think both are wrong. And then there's a third group who says, why can't we all just live together? And Peter Beinart most recently put out an op-ed on this. I think that's wrong. If you look at the history of the area, within the Muslim world, minorities have not fared very well. And the idea of Zionism, and I consider myself a Zionist, is the Jewish people upholding their own security, being responsible for their own security. It is something that the Jewish people learned from 2,000 years in the diaspora. It's something we have seen the benefit of over the last 72 years of the state of Israel, and we can't give that up. So the two-state solution to me is the only pathway forward.
It's very insightful. So now on the topic of anti-Semitism, you're a leader in Congress in the fight against BDS. Can you please explain why BDS is harmful?
Sure. Well, it goes back to what I was saying before, and I'm going to expand the anti-Semitism. But BDS, which is the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement, a global movement pushed by the Palestinians, denies the aspiration of the Jewish people for their own state. As I mentioned earlier, I believe both Palestinians and the Jews, the Israelis, have a legitimate aspiration to a state of their own. That's why I support this two-state solution. BDS denies the Jewish aspiration, fails to recognize it, delegitimizes it, and in that is inherently anti-Semitic. So I led the effort last year, 2019, to pass a resolution that reaffirmed U.S. support for a safe and secure Israel, support for a two-state solution, but also condemned BDS because of their refusal to acknowledge or accept the Jewish aspiration. And it passed in the House with 398 votes. Overwhelming support, again, on both sides.
Mm-hmm. And what advice would you have for college students who are confronted by BDS?
So whether it's college, high school, middle school students, it doesn't matter. It's the same advice. Part of it is educate yourself, understand the issues, and part of educating oneself is understanding the issues from all sides. So it's not just reading the narrative of the Jewish people, but understand the narrative of the Palestinians. And where there are legitimate points, but also equally important, perhaps more important, where there are efforts to delegitimize Israel and make specious or irreconcilable arguments that aren't based on facts. So that's the first piece. The second piece is know you're not alone. There are, like myself in Congress, members of Congress, but in our communities, whether it's the Jewish Federations, the Jewish Federation of North America, Hillel, other groups who are there to support you. And it's not just the Jewish people who support a strong and secure Israel. The vast majority of people in the United States support a strong and secure Israel. And so we've got the facts on our side, we've got allies, and we need to be able to stand our ground.
And so one of Jews' one of Gen Z Jews' goals is to teach teens about anti-Semitism. What do you think teens should know about it?
About anti-Semitism?
Mm-hmm.
I think the first thing to know is that it's not new. It's been around for as long as I guess there have been Jews. And it's not going away. We're seeing a spike. It ebbs and flows, and we're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism. That's a function of a lot of things going around the country and around the world. Second thing is it's not about you personally, and so don't internalize it in that respect. But to the third point, don't accept it in any respect. At any time, anywhere, we need to speak out against it. There can be no room for bigotry, racism, anti-Semitism, and so we need to speak out against it every chance we have. Again, we have allies. Don't forget that, but we will be in good shape on that.
Mm-hmm. And so, just on our final topic on leadership, an important part for Gen Z Jews is leadership and taking a stand. So I'm interested in what gave you the courage to run again after you lost an election.
I wasn't finished. So the bold step was to run the first time. I've never done it, not knowing what's involved. Running after losing, I know what's involved. I know what I was going to face. Maybe not so bold. Knowing it, maybe a little crazy, because this is a tough business. People attack you. They ascribe false stories about you. They say horrible things. And that's just the nature of politics in this moment, which is unfortunate. It shouldn't be that way. But I knew why I ran for Congress in 2012 the first time when I won. And when I decided to run again in 2016 after losing in 2014, it was because I had more things I wanted to do. A big piece of that was the U.S.-Israel relationship. In fact, the final, I don't want to say straw that broke the camel's back, because that's the wrong metaphor, but the final piece of the package that said, yeah, this is the right thing to do, is I was listening to a speaker, a former Israeli Air Force general, helicopter pilot, talking about his experiences, in particular, in this case, in the Yom Kippur War. He was sent to rescue a downed pilot on the Egyptian side of the Suez Canal. And as he described it very briefly, he flew in the dark of night all by himself because it was a mission so dangerous that he didn't want to put any other soldiers at risk. He landed, couldn't find the guy, so he had to turn his lights on for just 1 second to find the pilot, got the pilot on board, but now they were identified. And just the night lit up like 4th of July with fireworks. These were bullets and bombs trying to down the helicopter. They made it back to Israel safely. And when he got out to look at his helicopter, he was astonished to find that there was no damage to the helicopter. None of those enemy assaults caught the thing. And he finished his story. His name is Nehemiah Dagan. He finished his story with saying, sometimes the mission may seem really difficult, but you do what you have to do. And for me, that was kind of where I stood in 2014. I tell that story now, speaking to the Gen Z Jews, because this is a scary time. Whether it's anti-Semitism, assaults on the legitimacy of Israel, COVID, there's so many things that are really challenging. But keep in mind Nehemiah Dagan and the story that he knew what he had to do, and he was confident that someone was looking over him. If we do what we do, if we stay focused, if we stay true to our values, in our case, it's Jewish values, everything's going to work out in the end, because we're going to make it work out. Not just because it happens, because that good people like you and others do the right thing.
That's very important to hear. Thank you so much, Congressman, for taking time out of your day to speak with us. I think that teens will really enjoy this.
Thank you. This was great. Look forward to seeing you again. And thanks for doing what you're doing. It's really a wonderful enterprise you are embarking on here.
Thank you.